In this lesson, we're going to discuss how you can select secure protocols. When you are trying to increase the security of your enterprise network, it is important to select secure protocols, ports, and transport methods to ensure that your data in transit remains confidential and safe from prying eyes. Which protocols, ports, and transport methods you choose will greatly influence the security, efficiency, and reliability of your enterprise network. First, you must select a secure protocol that meets your specific use case. When it comes to protocols, a protocol is a set of rules or procedures for transmitting data between electronic devices. There are many protocols that can accomplish the same thing, but which protocol you select can either increase or decrease the overall security of your networks. For example, if you want to visit a website, you could do that by using HTTP or Hypertext Transfer Protocol. HTTP will transmit your data in plain text, which makes it susceptible to an on-path or eavesdropping attack where the threat actor could intercept and read your sensitive communications. Conversely, you could instead choose to access the website using Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure, also more commonly known as HTTPS, to encrypt any data that you want to send before it's transmitted so that that data is sent as ciphertext that is unreadable to anyone except the intended recipient who has the proper decryption key to convert the ciphertext back into human-readable plain text. Or, if you want to conduct a file transfer from your laptop to a given file server, you can either use FTP or SFTP to make that file transfer. If you opt to use the file transfer protocol known as FTP, your data will be transmitted in plain text, which makes it susceptible to the same kind of on-path or eavesdropping attacks as HTTP. On the other hand, if you opt to use secure file transfer protocol known as FFTP, all of your data will be passed between your laptop and the file server through an encrypted secure shell or SSH tunnel to ensure that data maintains its confidentiality during the data transfer. With HTTP versus HTTPS and FTP versus SFTP, we should just choose to use the encrypted version of the same basic protocol, but that is not always the case. For example, if you wanted to remotely control a server using a command prompt or terminal environment, then you might opt to use Telnet or Secure Shell. Telnet is an older, insecure protocol that was traditionally used for remote command line administration of your servers and network devices. Telnet is an application layer protocol that allows a user on one computer to log into another computer that is part of the same network. However, Telnet has significant security flaws because it doesn't use any type of security or encryption. So all of the data transmitted using Telnet, including login credentials like username and password, are all sent as plain text over the network, which makes it vulnerable to an on-path or eavesdropping attack. On the other hand, if you select the Secure Shell protocol, usually referred to as SSH, then we will be using a protocol that still allows for the remote command line administration of your servers and other network devices, but it uses strong passwords and public key authentication to log into the SSH service, and all of the data being transmitted is encrypted, therefore making the transfer over the network safe. So if a system administrator uses SSH to log into a server, their login credentials are encrypted before being sent over the network so that even if someone could intercept that data, this attacker could not be able to read it without the proper encryption key. This makes SSH a much more secure choice for remote command line administration and should always be selected instead of Telnet on all your systems and networks. So, as a basic rule, always select a protocol that will use encryption to protect your data while it is transferred over a given network. This includes protocols like HTTPS, SFTP, SSH, IMAPS, POP3S, SMTPS, SNMPS, and others. In general, almost every protocol has both an unencrypted or legacy version and a newer, more modern encrypted version. Most of the time, the protocol will simply add an S to the end of the unencrypted protocol to signify that that is a more secure version of that protocol. For example, if we add the S to HTTP, that's going to give us HTTPS, which is the encrypted and more secure version of the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Next, let's consider the port selection process. Ports are logical constructs that identify specific processes or services in a given system. These ports are associated with an IP address for the host and the protocol type being used. These ports are categorized into three ranges: well-known ports, which are from 0 to 1023, registered ports, which are from 1024 to 49151, and dynamic or private ports, which are from 49,152 to 65,535. Well-known ports are used by system processes or services and consist of port ranges again from 0 to 1023. Registered ports are usually used by software applications and utilize a port number between 1024 and 49151. Dynamic ports or private ports are often used for client-side connections, and these range again from 49152 to port number 65535. Dynamic ports are usually randomly assigned by an operating system when you attempt to make a new connection to a well-known or registered port on another system. For well-known and registered ports, you will find that the default port number for a protocol will also indicate if it is a secure or insecure port and protocol. Consider the example for our HTTP and HTTPS ports. If you select HTTP, you'll be using port 80 by default for your web server, which relies on the hypertext transfer protocol. On the other hand, if you select HTTPS, you will be using port 443 by default for your web server, which will rely on the hypertext transfer protocol secure, which uses encryption to protect the data being sent over the HTTPS protocol. If you want to force all of your users to access your server by only using the more secure HTTPS connection, then you will need to ensure that port 443 is open on your firewall while port 80 is closed or blocked on your firewall. If you consider the ports for email, you will see that we have a few options to consider, including SMTP and SMTPS for sending emails, or POP3 or POP3S, IMAP and IMAP-S for receiving emails. The Simple Mail Transfer Protocol comes in two varieties, SMTP and SMTPS, and both are used for sending emails. SMTP is the insecure version that operates in plain text over port 25, but SMTPS is the secure and encrypted version that operates over port 587 instead. If you are trying to receive emails, you can either use the Post Office Protocol 3 or the Internet Message Access Protocol. The Post Office Protocol 3 comes in the default POP3 version and the more secure POP3S version. The Post Office Protocol 3 is an email protocol that allows for the retrieval of email messages from a mail server going over port 110. But if you use the encrypted version of POP3S, you will instead use port 995 to receive your emails. The Internet Message Access Protocol, on the other hand, is the more modern email protocol that provides access to email messages stored on a mail server and enables users to manage their email accounts over port 143. If you opt to use the encrypted version of IMAP, we will call this IMAP-S or IMAP Secure, and it will encrypt all of your emails before they are received by you over port 993. In terms of these various email protocols, they will all work fine depending on your use case, but you should really use the secure version of these ports instead of their unencrypted varieties to help protect your emails from being intercepted and read by unauthorized individuals. When selecting ports, it's important to follow the principle of least privilege, which means only opening the ports necessary for your application to function and blocking all others. This will help to minimize the attack surface and reduce your chances of unauthorized access or a data breach from occurring. Also, when it comes to ports, default port numbers are associated with specific services or protocols to simplify the communication process. For instance, HTTP typically uses port 80 while HTTPS uses port 443. These default assignments make it easier for devices to connect and communicate with one another without needing to specify a port explicitly. However, users and administrators have the flexibility to configure their systems to use different port numbers if they prefer. This flexibility allows for customization and can enhance security to some extent. Using default port numbers can be less secure because malicious actors often target these well-known ports in their attempts to exploit vulnerabilities. By using non-standard port numbers, such as by assigning port 8888 to your web server instead of using port 80, you can make your services less predictable to some extent and more challenging for attackers to find and target. However, it's important to note that while changing port numbers can add a layer of obscurity, it should not be considered a substitute for more robust security measures such as a strong authentication, encryption, and regular security updates. Additionally, using non-standard ports may make troubleshooting and administration more complex, so it should be done thoughtfully and documented carefully if your organization decides to use this approach. Personally, I found that there isn't much security to be gained by using alternative port numbers instead of the defaults, but you will still see some organizations using this non-standard ports for some of their services, especially inside of their internal networks. Finally, let's take a look at different transport methods that you can choose to utilize in your enterprise networks. A transport method refers to the way data is moved from one place to another, usually using either TCP or UDP to transmit the data. The Transmission Control Protocol, or TCP, is a connection-oriented protocol that ensures data is delivered without any errors. TCP is able to ensure this delivery by establishing a connection before data is transferred, and it's using acknowledgements, retransmissions of lost data, and sequencing to ensure that integrity of the data is being transmitted. This makes TCP ideal for applications where data accuracy is important, such as when sending data to or from a web server or email server. For example, whenever you try to connect to a given website, your browser uses HTTP or HTTPS to request web pages from the server using the TCP transport method. TCP ensures that all of the web pages arrive correctly and in the right order for processing by your web browser. If any data is lost in the transmission, the TCP method will automatically retransmit the data to ensure that the web page that you see in the browser is exactly as it should be with no missing or out of order data. On the other hand, the User Datagram Protocol, or UDP, is a connectionless protocol that doesn't guarantee delivery and instead simply sends datagrams without establishing a connection, and UDP does not provide any error checking or recovery services. This makes UDP much faster and more efficient than TCP, but can result in data packets being lost during the transmission. This makes UDP more suitable for applications like streaming, video, or gaming, where speed is more important than the complete accuracy. For example, if you're streaming this video and one frame is lost during the transmission from our servers to your browser, you likely won't even notice the difference. This is because video plays about 30 frames per second, and the human eye has a hard time seeing missing frames as long as 24 or more of the frames per second are received. So if the video only shows you 29 frames instead of the 30 frames each second, you likely won't even notice the difference. And this is why UDP is a great choice for streaming video and other near real-time communications that can allow for some lost data without affecting the end result the user is attempting to achieve. For example, streaming video services like YouTube or Netflix heavily use UDP because it provides more speed and efficiency for their data transmission needs. While TCP would ensure the delivery of all packets, it does so at a cost of speed and increased overhead, which makes it unsuitable for video streaming where a few lost packets do not significantly impact the overall viewing experience. With UDP, data packets are continuously streamed, and if packets are lost, the video player simply skips over the lost data and continues with the next data available to ensure a smoother playback for the end user. When you are attempting to select the right transport method for your organization's needs, you should first consider the nature of your application. If the application requires that data integrity be maintained as your top priority, then you should select Transmission Control Protocol, or TCP, to meet your needs. If instead you want to prioritize the speed and efficiency of your data transmission, using the User Datagram Protocol, or UDP, might be a more suitable choice to meet your needs. So remember, you should always opt for secure protocols that provide encryption, especially when transmitting sensitive data or over an untrusted network like the internet. Protocols like HTTPS, SFTP, SSH, IMAPS, POP3S, SMTPS, and SNMPS all rely on encryption as part of their protocols to ensure your data remains confidential while being transferred over a given network. Once you select the protocol, you can then assign the port that their protocol will use, with ports being categorized into three ranges: well-known ports, which range from 0 to 1023, registered ports, which range from 1024 to 49,151, and dynamic or private ports, which range from 49,152 to 65,535. Your system should also follow the principle of least privilege by only opening necessary ports while blocking all unneeded ports on your network and systems to reduce the attack surface and minimize the risk of unauthorized access. Finally, you need to select the transport method by opting to use either TCP or UDP. The Transmission Control Protocol, or TCP, is a connection-oriented protocol that ensures data is delivered without any errors by providing error checking and retransmission if the packets are lost. The User Datagram Protocol, or UDP, on the other hand, is a connectionless protocol that doesn't guarantee data delivery and instead simply sends datagrams without establishing a connection. And UDP does not provide any error checking or recovery services. By making informed choices about the protocols, ports, and transport methods used, you can significantly enhance the security, efficiency, and reliability of your organization's enterprise network.